so good to be here. And I was just chatting to one of our online students this morning and about the pursuit of happiness and how many pursue happiness not realizing what happiness is and looking for something out there. And I was reminded of Madame Jean-luc, who was, some of you know of her, and at the centuries ago, at the tender age of, I think it was 17 or 18, where she had searched for God in every avenue she found possible. And at the end of the day, was left feeling downcast. And a wise old priest was walking past one day and noticed her at the side of the road and said to her, "Madam, why are you so downcast?" And so she began to explain to him her sincere search for God in every way possible. And you know how many meetings she attended, how many prayers, whatever. And at the end of her explanation, he said, "Well, you know, you're not going to find what you're looking for if you look for it outside of yourself." And in that moment, she went to her humble kitchen, and in that humble scenery, she just said, "God, are you really here?" And she was just overwhelmed with his presence. And you know, the same thing happened with the woman at the well, John 4, where she encounters Jesus, and in her pursuit of happiness, she suddenly encounters in him a wellspring of life that's reflected in her. And at one point she asks, "Well, you know, one day when the Messiah comes, we will know all things." And she says, Jesus says to her, "Woman, you don't have to look any further. You don't have to wait any longer. I am he." And then she says, "Yeah, but you Jews, you worship on that mountain, us Samaritans on this mountain. You know, what church do you go to?" Have you heard that before? And he says, "A time is coming where you go to worship will not matter, and how you worship will not matter, but it's who you are that matters before God." So it's who you are this morning. Philosophy, it's foolishness, you say, but I won't go away. I am holding you, loving you. I'm not far, oh my love, it's who you are. That's where you'll your heart. No, you'll never be apart from the love that is loving you. When you thought that you were right all along, but discover, oh dear, I was wrong. Love's more stubborn than your stubbornness. I am holding you, loving you. I'm not far, oh my love, it's who you are. That's where you'll encounter me. the beating of your heart. No, you'll never be apart from the love that is loving you. And when you think that you have lost your way, I am the way, and I'm not leaving you. I'm not far, oh my love, it's who you are. That's where you'll encounter me. It's in the beating of your heart. You will never be apart from the love that is loving you. Oh, love is loving you. Love is loving you. And I've seen I am, now I know that I am loved. I've seen I am, now I know who I am. Sing, I've seen I am. I've seen I am, and now I know that I am loved. Oh, I am loved. I've seen I am, now I know who I am. I've seen I am. I've seen I am, and now I know that I am loved. Oh, I am loved. I've seen I am, now I know who I am. I have beheld your face, in righteousness I see. Beholding the grace that smiles at me. Sing, I've seen I am, I've seen I am, and now I know that I am loved. I've seen I am, now I know who I am. I am loved, 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 And you're more real than the ground I'm standing on. You're more real than the wind in my lungs. You're more real than the wind in my lungs. Sing, you're more real than the ground. You're more real than the ground I'm standing on. the ground I'm standing on. You're more real than the wind in my lungs. Your thoughts define me, Lord. Your thoughts define me. You're inside me. You're my reality. You're my reality. Abba, I belong to you. Abba, I belong to you. My Abba, I belong to you. I'm at home in you. Abba, I'm at home in you. I'm at home in you. Oh, I'm at home in you. My Abba. Thank you, Papa, for your embrace. Thank you that we find ourselves lost in you and found in you at the same time. We adore you.
Thank you. We are absolutely thrilled to be here. I think this is on. Yes, I can hear it. And we especially been looking forward to see Eugene and Jesse. We see them maybe once a year, so it's been a wonderful time to see our family here as well. And thank you all for being here. I think it's been about 5 years since we were here, and but there's been such special, beautiful relationships formed here, as Marilyn said earlier as well. I think last year when we were here in Denver, they especially drove down and we enjoyed a meal together, and those kind of bonds that goes just beyond the activity is really something that's special. So thank you, Marilyn and Mike. We appreciate your friendship. I am so excited about today. And I was this morning just flipping open the scriptures, and I was reminded in Ephesians 1 verse 17 how Paul prays that he says, Father, that we might have a spirit of revelation and understanding in the knowledge of him. I was reminded of another scripture in 1 Corinthians 2 where he says, what no eye has seen, what no ear has heard, what has not entered the imagination of man, God has revealed. Now, I want to suggest to you that despite your years of wisdom and scholarly study, despite your great experiences in life, that there are still some stuff that you've never seen. There's stuff you've never heard. There's things you haven't even imagined. And I can just feel the vibration of God's Spirit saying, just give me a gap. With you for a moment, can I just suggest to you that you open yourself up to the spirit of revelation. Just in your own personal chatting to your Abba right now, say, Papa, I'm ready for you to show me stuff that I've not seen before. I'm ready for you to help me hear, to help me experience what does not originate within my own imagination. You see, because often we want revelation simply to be a confirmation that everything I've believed so far is right. Isn't that what we want revelation to be? We want God's Spirit to just put His arms over us and say, you were right. And I've come to just give you deeper understanding in how right you've been. But true revelation, a true encounter with God, is going to disorientate you. It's going to surprise you. It's going to confuse you for a little while, because encounter with God does not fit into your established story. Encounter with God doesn't fit into your box. And how many of you have seen a lion live? Not okay, some people have. Okay, I'm going to use in a zoo, yes, as well. Quite a few people have. That's a good sign. Now, I've seen a lion in a zoo, and let me tell you, I want to disappoint you. You've actually not seen a lion. When I was growing up, I lived next to one of the biggest national parks in South Africa, the Kruger National Park. And in those days, the fences weren't that well designed. I would scale it quite easily. And I remember, even before I went to school still, as a 5-6-year-old, I would be over the fence into the Kruger National Park. They had some boulders and rock formations there, and that's where I loved to play. And I would climb up these rock formations, and I remember one day as I pulled myself over the last piece of rock, I just saw this movement, and then I heard a roar that chilled my blood and froze me to that rock. It felt like for eternity. But I just clung on, waiting to be eaten or something. But that was an encounter with a lion in its natural environment. I can tell of a few other encounters like that as well. But the difference between that encounter and then later seeing a lion behind bars in a zoo, in a fence, is the difference between life and death. You know, that lion is no longer alive the way it's supposed to be alive. You know, for 2,000 years, we have tried to take the wild, untamed, beautiful, stunning truth of who Jesus is and what He proclaims, and we've tried to make it acceptable. We've tried to institutionalize it. We've tried to put it within our frameworks where it would no longer be so disruptive. We've tried to make it acceptable to our cultures and our lifestyles. And very often what is labeled the gospel is just a shadow of the wild, untamed life that was displayed in the person of Jesus. And this morning, I want to speak about that untamed faith of Jesus Christ. That faith that is not just the product of my own imagination. That faith that disorientates me and disrupts me. That faith that again awakens a sense of wonder and a sense of meaning in this life that all my rational calculations just can't quite do. You see, faith is not simply my response to the information given to me in a message. Faith is not the appropriate response I work up to hearing the gospel. No, the faith of God is the content of the declaration of the gospel. The gospel is the declaration of the faithfulness of God in Christ Jesus to reconcile the world unto himself. It comes to us as a gift. In other words, faith is not a transaction. It's not what I give God in order for him to give me salvation. Faith itself is a gift. Ephesians 2, don't you know that you've been saved by grace through faith, and that not of yourselves. It is a gift of God. Or as Paul says in Galatians 2, that I've encountered something that means I no longer live. Wow, Paul, what is this thing you speak about? It says, nevertheless, there's a way in which I live, yet not I, but the life that I now live, I live by the faith of Christ Jesus. You see, the faith that Paul encountered in Christ wasn't just a new little argument, a new little philosophy or attitude towards life that kind of readjusts the way in which he looked at certain things. No, this faith so thoroughly and deeply transformed him that he did not even recognize himself anymore. It's no longer I who live. Woo! So the source of faith, that's the first thing I want to just make very clear, that if your faith neatly fits within your categories of understanding, if you've got your faith perfectly under control, and you know what it is you believe and what you don't, you are dealing with a shadow, a dead, nothing reasoning, not with the faith of Jesus Christ. Because the faith of Jesus Christ is not a faith that can be tamed. It's not a faith that you're going to subject to your understanding and manipulate for you to control it. It's a faith that's going to continue to disrupt your life and draw you into places of meaning and beauty that you have never imagined before. The content of this faith, again, the content is not a sense of certainty that I've got to kind of work up in myself, where I try to persuade myself of something. and try and be consistent in my actions and my words in affirming that statement. No, faith is not a bunch of statements, I believe. Faith is so much more. You see, it's the very nature of human consciousness to try and subject everything it encounters to the logic of its own story. That's the way in which human consciousness works. We encounter things and we reorientate ourselves around the realities and experiences in life, and we try and fit these new experiences into a story that we've been telling ourselves from a very young age. And when we encounter something that doesn't fit the story, we do two things with it. And maybe let me just give you a quick, real example of this to just know that this is the way humans work. Even as you look at me now and I look at you, there's a narrow band where your eye is focused and you see more clearly than in your periphery. The reason that works the way it is your brain has decided that there's some information that is really not worth dealing with. I don't need to process that. Maybe I need to know if something's really moving. Okay, then I'll give it my attention. But for the most part, your mind is very efficient at saying, I'm only going to give my attention to what deserves my attention, and it's a very narrow band. The rest I'll just filter out and wait until it becomes really important. And in the same way, that is the way in which we go through life and the experiences we have. We kind of filter out most of the stuff and we give our attention to the part that we think is important. And very often the information that makes it into your conscious awareness is a very small percentage of the information and experiences you've had. Every now and then something slips in there that doesn't fit into your story. And we can give many examples of, kids are such a beautiful example of they continually encounter new stuff. And they wonder, how do I negotiate my way around this new experience? Very soon we make up our minds that we know how the life story works and what fits and what doesn't. Now, when something pops into our consciousness that doesn't fit into our logical story, we can either expand our story or we can just suppress it. And by suppressing it, we just say, that doesn't make sense, forget it. Don't spend too much time on it. You know that this story has served me well in the past. It helps me predict the future. I'm quite comfortable that I know how life works. And because I know how it works, I can more accurately predict how it will work. And we like that sense of security. But when that whisper that says you can find security in being right, that temptation that says if you can just be completely right, you will be completely secure. What it doesn't tell you is that, yes, your certainty can give you a sense of security, but there's nothing more secure than a prison. And very often, your rightness, your certainty becomes your prison. your very small little space, your very small little life in which I'm right, and I'm going to protect the borders of how right I am, and never experience the wonder of a world way beyond the boundaries of your certainty. It is in the midst of that certainty that the gospel comes. The gospel comes as this glorious declaration, this gloriously good news that says, I've got good news for you. You are wrong. Life is so much more than what you are certain of it is. You are so much more than the story you've been telling yourself. You see, we've confused faith with certainty. Faith isn't certainty. And the opposite of faith isn't doubt. The opposite of faith is certainty. You see, when you find yourself in those prison walls of your certainty, faith and doubt actually works together. There's a divine doubt. A divine doubt that stirs within you questions to say, maybe there's more than these prison bars I find myself behind. See, the day that you become absolutely certain about who you are and how life works, that's also the day in which you become perfectly boring. Life becomes unbearably predictable. No, faith, the faith of God, works together with doubt. Remember when Paul encounters Jesus as he was riding to persecute people? It was in the very moment in which he doubted that what he believed, that God was commissioning him to go and kill all these heretics. It's in the very moment that he doubted that he was right, that faith awoke in his heart to a God who was more than the logic and the story he's been telling himself so far. You see, this faith is less like logical conclusions and more like the illogical, unreasonable, unsettling encounter with the resurrected Jesus. This faith is less like the sober calculations we can come to in our studies and our pursuits, and more like the disorientating encounter with the dead being raised. I mean, the dead being raised is not going to fit into your logic. The resurrected Jesus is not going to fit into your sober calculations. In fact, there's a philosopher, Jean-luc is his name, and he spoke of a certain phenomena, a certain way in which we experience life, and he called this phenomena the saturated phenomena. In other words, an experience that is so full and saturated that it overflows. And he gave 4 distinctive qualities of what he calls the saturated phenomena. And I'm going to quickly go through those 4 and apply them to the resurrection of Jesus Christ and to our faith. The first thing he said about the saturated phenomena is that it's an experience that is not foreseen. It is surprising. It doesn't fit into the logic of my predictions of what can be. So it's a surprise. You know, I think sometimes we read the scriptures and with our predetermined interpretations and understanding of what is there, we kind of said, well, why were the disciples surprised at Jesus being resurrected? Were they dull or something? I mean, it's so plain throughout the scriptures. And so wonderful to have hindsight, eh? But none of the disciples expected Jesus. None of them in the first place thought he was God as they walked with him. That realization that there's something about this man that embodies the divine, that's something that develops way beyond the resurrection, and maybe because of the resurrection. But in their daily encounter with him, he is their teacher, their leader that's fully human. But in the resurrection, I mean, there's a few texts within the Old Testament that speaks about resurrection, but it speaks of it in a completely different way than what actually happens in the person of Jesus. So the resurrection of Jesus isn't simply a fulfillment of their expectations and their prophecies. It is an experience that transforms their expectation. Okay. So I think it's very arrogant for us to say, if we were the disciples, of course we would have known what was coming. But he took 12 of the dullest people in Galilee, and every time he tells a parable, what's their response? We don't understand. Which I think is a beautifully honest way of engaging with Jesus. But first of all, it was unforeseen. No one expected the Messiah to be raised from the dead. They had to go back to the scriptures and said, okay, yes, we need to reinterpret the way we understand the very few scriptures that speaks about resurrection, because in their interpretation it spoke about the general resurrection at the end of time. No one expected an individual, the Messiah, to be raised individually. And so, yes, it happened according to the scripture, but this encounter itself transforms their expectation and their interpretation of what he came to fulfill. It was a surprise. Faith needs to continually be open to the unforeseen, to the surprise of life, to truly be faith. Faith is not certainty. Faith. You see, in Hebrews 12, when it speaks about the heroes of faith, every time God calls somebody, he doesn't call them out of their discomfort into greater comfort. He doesn't call them out of what they are familiar with. He doesn't call them out of, what they're unfamiliar with into something more familiar. He doesn't call them out of their uncertainty into something more certain. No. Go read it. Every time God calls somebody, He says, I want you to leave behind you everything you thought you knew. I want you to leave what is familiar, to leave the land in which you're comfortable, to leave the environment in which you are comfortable. This is not a call to simply be greater and more successful in what you've always done. That's not the gospel. The gospel is this disruptive call that says, you don't know yourself the way I know you. And I'm calling you into the unknown, into the uncertain, into what is not yet. And the greatest faith happens in the very midst of the greatest uncertainty, where there's nothing in the natural that can comfort me except the fact that I know that I've heard a call that takes me beyond who I thought I was, that takes me beyond who I thought you were. A call that suddenly unveils the beauty in the enemy, the value in the outcast, the wonder in the desert, the possibility in a place that everyone only sees hopelessness. That's the faith of Jesus Christ. The kind of faith that says, in the midst of the worst you can imagine, in the midst of death and hell, that's where I do my best work. Woo! Come on! So this faith is, number one, unforeseen. This faith is, secondly, the word that Jean-luc Marion used is unbearable. And what he means by that is that it is so overwhelming that we have difficulty seeing it. We want to look, but we want to look away as well. It's unbearable. I don't know if you've been in the kind of experience. I know sometimes Mary-Ann goes to a movie with me, and she wants to watch, but she's also into my jacket. She doesn't want to watch. So I think many years ago we watched Saving Private Ryan, and she spent a whole movie in my jacket. Yeah. It was wonderful, but I wanted to. So there's some things that's unbearable. You want to look, but you don't want to look. But the very nature of the resurrection kind of gives us that same sense that when people encounter Jesus, it's this disorientating experience of a stranger that they recognize. How do you recognize the stranger? It's an absence that is present. Like the women come to the tomb and say, "Where is he?" And they say, "He's not here, he is risen." So it's this disorientating experience of an absence that is kind of the negative imprint of his overwhelming presence. And how to articulate this experience becomes baffling. And that's, in fact, the third quality that he puts on the saturated phenomena is that it transgresses the boundaries of linguistics. In other words, it blows your concepts apart. It doesn't fit into your story. We search for words to try and describe what is beyond language. And that is also the beauty of what we see in the New Testament witness of the resurrection, is they're trying to narrate something that is not purely historical, but it's also not just metaphorical. It's somewhere between. Yes, it's fully historic, but it's also non-historic. It's an appearance of somebody that's no longer confined to time, who materializes when he wants to, but it actually did happen, and how to kind of communicate this event. And that's why in all the narratives of the people who speaks about the resurrection, no one actually narrates the event itself. There's nothing in the gospel that describes for us in detail how he was raised from the dead, became resurrected. No, it is the disorientated, confusing language of people who encountered something that they, after the event, that was so overwhelming that they're trying to find language to describe it with. And this event will continually call their language forward, call it to become more than what it was. And that's actually so beautiful in terms of an event that is so overwhelming that it doesn't fit into language. That accounts, I think, for the seeming contradictions, or can we say rather, maybe a more acceptable word, the constraints and the tension that's in the New Testament of people describing things in different ways that sometimes look contrary. I think that in itself is witness to the fact that this is an event that doesn't fit into one neat category. This is an event that doesn't fit into one perfect little description. This is an event that's going to continually challenge our language to expand and go beyond and be renewed, to become relevant in our community, in our age, to continue to describe something that we acknowledge is beyond our conceptual constraints. That's why Paul says in Ephesians 3, that we might grasp, just somehow find a way to touch what is beyond understanding. You see, it's not that God is completely unknowable, but rather that God is infinitely knowable. And our minds and our logic is finite. And so the challenge is not to fit God into your mind, but rather to stick your tiny little mind into God every now and then. And let it be saturated. Let it be overwhelmed. And so by this I also don't mean that, there's a kind of persuasion that comes from logical study and conclusion. And that has its value and its place. Please, we should apply all the logic we can, especially when we speak about God. So often we confuse mystery with nonsense. Do whatever you can to speak as logically, as clearly as you can. But once we've done everything humanly possible to be as precise and as logical as we can in explaining this wonder, we should realize that God has never subjected himself to your understanding of him. That he remains more. See, there's not one picture that captures all of beauty. We live near a place that's got amazing sunsets. And in the beginning, I would run out every night with the camera. And after a while, I realized this just cannot do it justice. Eugene gets closer with his camera and his skills. But even that, we try and capture that beauty. But there's not one picture that's going to capture all of beauty. Beauty always exceeds our descriptions of it. Beauty always exceeds whatever you've experienced of it before. It doesn't subject itself to your understanding of it, yet it freely gives itself to anyone who's simply prepared to be astonished. God does not subject himself to any one understanding of God. Yet he freely gives himself fully to anyone who is simply prepared to be astonished. So, it's unforeseen, it's surprising, it's unbearable, and so the very language that the New Testament uses is always saying and saying. He wasn't there, he's not here, but he's risen. He's present, but he's absent. He's a stranger, but I recognize him. It always uses that double kind of way to try and describe this experience that's larger than our linguistics. It's unbearable. I touched on the third one as well, but it breaks through the borders of our language. And the last one, he said it cannot, I'm trying to think of the words that he used. You cannot fully grasp it. In other words, it's never an experience that you're just going to fully take hold of subjectively and get it under control. Rather, this is a subject that's going to transform you in the process of you beholding it. In other words, you don't behold the resurrected Christ in order to tame him, in order to subject him to your categories of understanding, in order to take this lion and get him into your zoo. How many people worship a God who's kept in their own personal zoo so that he doesn't disrupt their life too much? We'll come and spend time with you when we have to, and we'll revere you and bring you some food. Make you tamer and tamer so that we can soothe our conscience that we do have a God. And I'm very certain about who this God is. I've got him well contained. And I know my future is beautifully predictable. No, the true God wants to roar in a way that chills your blood. He wants to grab a hold of you and draw you into a wilderness that you have not imagined before. He wants to once again reveal to you things that no eye has seen, no ear has heard, that has never entered the imagination of man. This God wants to draw you there and overwhelm you with wonder. And as you behold him, you do not grasp him in such a way that he comes under your control, that he fits into your zoo. But as you behold him, this very act of beholding him begins to transform you, begins to change you. Woo! So the untamed faith of Jesus Christ, if we live by that faith, it will be a faith that is open to surprise. It is a faith that will lead us into experiences that are unbearable and overwhelming. It will be a faith that leads us into a place where our language is not stagnant. If you say exactly the same things you've said about God now as 20 years ago, oh my goodness, please, just for your own sake, find new words. But for our sake too. Imagine going with your wife, looking at the sunset and using the exact same dogmatic, boring statements to tell her how beautiful a sunset is. She's going to ask you in a few weeks' time, can you find another way of saying this? So please allow this sense of wonder to transform your language as well. Don't stick to the same just statements. We're dealing with a truth that is dynamic, that is living, that is moving. Allow your language to at least be the same. Truth is not static. You see, this faith is less like statements I have to believe and more like beauty that astounds me. It's more like the trust that develops in a friendship and a relationship rather than just, this is our statement of faith. La, 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 la. You spend a week drawing it up and then you forget about it until you've got trouble in your church. Then you tell people, go read the statement of faith or whatever. Most of those statements are so dead and static. No, faith that's based on trust or truth is living. It's something that continually searches for poetry, pictures, words to describe a relationship that's alive. Glory. So what I wanted to do today, this afternoon and tomorrow is kind of look at these three aspects: faith, hope, and love. And I hope that you found a taster this morning that we're not just going to give you the same old boring formulas of what is faith, what is hope, and what is love. We are looking at the wonder of this experience of God, a faith that continues to transform us, a hope that continues to open up our expectation to a future that is more beautiful, more wonder, more unexpected than what you've ever imagined. I mean, I'm sure that in the times of Jesus, there were some very respected Pharisees that had the coming of the Messiah worked out perfectly. They had all their latest books of how to interpret the prophecies. They had all the latest signs of what was happening in their land with the Roman Empire and the politics. It's all in the text. I told you, this is the way it's going to be. They had the expectations worked out very specifically based on their interpretation of the scripture. Yet they missed Jesus. Jesus appears and he says, none of you know the Father. Hey, despite your thousands of years of Bible study, you've missed it. And I think the faith he introduces to us today is the same kind of faith that should open up our expectation for the future, not as some dogmatic prediction based on my certain interpretation of the book of Revelations, but rather it's the kind of faith that says, I think God can surprise us again. I think for God all things are possible. So there's something about hope that we'll do this afternoon that is more exciting than just, a formula of how to get your next goal. There's something much more beautiful about this faith, this hope. And then tomorrow we'll speak about love, which, is one of the things that can become so sentimental so quickly. So we're going to look at some beautiful examples in the scriptures of that. I want to end off this session with one last story about the kind of effect that this faith has upon us. And this story is found in Acts 10. Now, Peter started encountering a Jesus that was more than the Jesus he knew when he walked with him. And this new faith started turning upside down things in his worldview that he never expected to be turned upside down. In fact, it was nearing supper time that Peter went up. He was quite hungry, so I think he decided to rather go pray upstairs than smell the food downstairs. So he goes upstairs, and as he's waiting, as the dinner is prepared, he falls into a trance and he sees the vision of a big sheet coming down, and in it are all the animals that, according to his religion, is considered impure, unclean. Remember that? Now, quickly, let's think about how that picture is relevant to you. What in your Christian upbringing was considered impure or unholy? I remember, growing up in a word of faith kind of charismatic background, there was things that looked like another religion wasn't allowed in our house. Okay, a little statue of Buddha or incense that comes from India or, whatever looks like its origin is not Christian, undoubtedly carried a multiple of demons with it. So it was not allowed in the house. So I'm just trying to stimulate your mind. What in your Christian background was considered unholy or impure? Because I want you to identify with what's happening with Peter. Peter grew up as a devout Jew. And there's certain things that you did not do, certain foods you did not eat. There's certain foods that were associated with the pagans, with that unclean bunch that we want nothing to do with. And as he sees this vision, something happens that Peter's never seen. He's never heard it. It never entered his imagination. This is a voice from somewhere else telling Peter, I want you to partake of this. No way. Peter kind of is wondering, is this a vision from God or from the devil? I don't know, but no way. We know that's unclean. And 3 times this happens. And then the Lord speaks to him and he says, there's people coming and I want you to go with them. During the same time, there's a Gentile, a non-Jew, somebody from another religion, who was praying. And it's quite interesting that the scripture says that his good works, his generosity, and his devotion to God brought him to God's attention. And God speaks to him through a messenger and says, I want to tell you a bit more about me, so send some of your people to go and get Peter at that street, etc. Amazing how accurately some pagans can hear from God, isn't it? So he sends these guys to Peter's house. Peter meets them. They stay the night. They have a conversation. And the next day, Peter comes to his house. Now, this was difficult for Peter because as he meets him, he says, I've never set foot in the house of a Gentile. Now, again, I want you to kind of consider, what does this faith tell you about your situation? Maybe you've grown up in a Christian home. You've considered some religion, some people, some things unholy, unclean. You've never set your foot in one of those other temples or in the house of somebody of another religion. And here Peter finds himself, and the whole revelation is dawning on Peter. And the first words, the words he speaks to Cornelius is, God has shown me not to call any man, any person, unclean or unholy. Now we're talking about a faith that calls you out of your comfortable Christian faith and says, I want you to get comfortable with people from another culture, from another faith. Start conversations. Not conversations of how wrong you are, how right I am. But conversations that begins with the deep understanding that what God has done in Christ means that I can look at any person and not see anything unclean or unholy, but recognize beauty and value. I remember about 2 years ago, I did a tour of the UK, and the next week I was speaking, I think it was a Methodist church, and I was reading through my Kindle, and this book popped up, Zen and the Birds of Prey, I think it was called. A little advert. And I was just going to flick past, but I saw it was by Thomas Merton, who I know is a respected Christian thinker. So I thought, well, I know nothing about Zen. Let me download that. I haven't read anything but theology for a few months. Let me read Zen and the Birds of Prey. So I just got the book. I started reading the first chapter, and this email popped up saying from the people I was going to be with the next week, and it said, you're coming here next week, and we've had this Zen community that has been trying to have a conversation with us, and we don't know what to do with it. But seeing that you come, would you be able? I said, gee whiskers, God knows how to set you up for things like that. I said, yes, I'm open to a conversation. I know nothing about Zen except the one chapter I've read, but isn't that what the conversation is about? And so the next week, I remember that afternoon, I was just praying because we were going to the Zen Center in England, and I was walking and praying and saying, Lord, I don't know even whether I'm going to have an opportunity to speak much, whether it's just questions and answers, but I want to prepare something. And I was thinking something non-confrontational, like beauty and God, something like that. And I just heard Abba said, I want you to tell them about the uniqueness of Jesus and how he brought our concepts of ourselves and of God to an end. And I said, okay. If I have an opportunity, I doubt I'm going to have one, but that's what I'll speak on. That evening, I thought this is an ideal opportunity to make a bunch of Christians very uncomfortable. So I invited the whole group to join me, going to the Zen Center. It was actually a precious group that came from the neighboring town. And the fact that they came shows that there's, been a wonderful working in them even. And so as we knocked on the door, the person opened, and I think they call him the Zen master, but the leader of the community grabbed me and hugged me. I was made to feel so welcome. And I went and sat on the floor with them, and we sat in a big circle. And I said, I don't really know how this works. Do we ask one another questions, or how are we going to go about? And Elam, one of the ladies said, please tell us about Jesus. And there was almost a gasp in the whole thing, because that's not what we expected. I'm so glad I was able to record it. We've actually got the recording of that message on our website. I called it Jesus Coming into Zen. So I was able for 40 minutes to speak about the uniqueness of Jesus and how he brings our concepts of God to an end. See, Jesus is also a revelation. Jesus didn't come to say, I'm going to show you how right you've always been. Yeah. Jesus didn't come to his nation and say, I'm fully behind your nationalism. We're going to get rid of these Romans. We're going to show them who's right. And we're going to send these heathens to hell. No, Jesus comes and he reveals a God much broader than their ideas and their concepts. And so we welcomed, they said, tell us about Jesus. And as the message finishes, Elam again said, we've never heard Christ presented like that. But ever since we invited you, and that was the previous Tuesday, ever since we invited you, Jesus keeps coming in when we do our meditations and we sing our mantras. And I said, what do you mean? She said, well, no, they've got a lot of pictures there of different spiritual leaders, and they had one of Jesus. She said, we always hid this one away because the kind of comments that we heard from Christians here kind of just made it not such a good experience. So that one we packed far away. But then since last Tuesday, we were all here, and many of us had this experience of Jesus coming towards us while we were singing our mantra. And she said, in fact, Jitai, their leader, why don't you tell what happened this morning? And he started speaking, and he said, well, this morning as he looked through the window, in the sunlight, he just saw somebody walking towards him, and he knew it was Jesus. And Jesus held up this cross, and he said, this is where all your ideas come to an end. And I said, well, seeing that Jesus shows up while you sing your mantras, won't you teach us one of your mantras? And obviously there were people who wants to first know what do these mantras mean before they're going to sing them. And I get that. And the words are amazing, They are thousands of years old, before the Jewish race even came into existence. Do you think God hid himself and waited to reveal himself until somebody got the right book written? God's been revealing himself. You know, Psalms 19 says that the first Bible was creation itself. Day to day pours forth wisdom. Night to night pours forth understanding. That all of creation declares the glory of God. And this mantra is so beautiful. It speaks about the source of our existence. We acknowledge your beauty. We embrace you. So we all learned the mantra. And Jesus showed up in such a tangible way in that community. Last year, Marianne traveled with me to the same community. That was one of the only trips that I did without her. Marianne overlooked the project we had in South Africa. And so last year, she came with me to this group in England, and we met with this precious couple, and Elam and Jedi, and I asked Jedi, I said, won't you tell Marianne, you know, the whole story of this vision of Jesus, because I told it to her, but I want her to hear it from you. And he sat back and he said, you know, it wasn't a vision, it was a meeting. And he has been with me ever since. So I just want to link that to Acts 10 and kind of say that I think this is one of the unique qualities of the faith of Christ Jesus, is that it's going to draw you out of the comfort of your own little world, of your own little faith, of your own little community, and it's going to draw you into a place where you can see the beauty in the other, the opportunity for friendship beyond borders that what you've considered possible before. It actually brings you to a place where there's a possibility that you might even love one who considers himself your enemy. Hey, what a beautiful faith. The faith of Christ Jesus is the faith that we live by. Do you have a song to end off with or not? I'm going to ask Mary Ann to just end off a song. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you for revealing to us the Father. Thank you for giving us your Spirit, and that your faithfulness has now become the substance of our lives. We honor you, Papa. Thank you that life is more than a boringly predictable existence according to predefined doctrines. But that you have called us into this glorious adventure in which we can co-create with you what is new, what is beautiful, what is unimaginable. Thank you, Abba. Amen.
How can we measure the expanses of you? We try to define you with a small point of view, but you are not tame. God, you are wild and free, sweeping me off my feet into the wonder that is you. And hope soars in the faithfulness of love. Faith breathes in the spaciousness of your embrace. beating in me. It's your joy so wild and free. Holy God, you are all in all. And now I cry out, God, you are beautiful. But all of my words fall short, for you are more than it all. Falling over my edge of my firm conclusions, caught up on the wings of your love's assurance, and hope soars in the faithfulness of love. Faith breathes in the spaciousness of your embrace. You're within but not confined, without but not excluded. You're above but not aloof, below but not cast down. Holy God, you are all in all. It's your breath that's breathing in me. It's your eyes through which I see. Your love is beating in me. Your joy so wild and free. Holy God, you are all in all. You're within but not confined, without but not excluded. Above but not aloof, below but not cast down. Holy God, you are all in all. It's your breath that's breathing in me. It's your eyes through which I see. You are breathing in me. Holy